Hello, this is Kim Nelson. This video is going to deal with how to bring rhino parts into a sculpt package for revision or refinement. A lot of the times in jewelry, the very clean, somewhat hard forms of rhino are not sufficient, and you need to resort to other tools to get what you want, or just because it's faster. I could do what I'm about to do entirely in rhino. It just wouldn't be as easy to do. So I have here a hook clasp for a chain, and the client would like to have the area between the wires flattened so that it can be engraved on. Pretty straightforward request. But getting all this to work out smoothly in rhino could be a challenge. So I'm going to take it into my favorite sculpting package, 3D coat. So I'm going to export, and I will export this as an OBJ file. You could also export it as a STL. Either works fine. They're both the same thing, basically. But I do it this way because when I take things out of rhino into 3D code, I take them as OBJs, and when I bring them back in, I bring them as STL. That way I look at the file folder, I can tell immediately whether this was a part on the way into sculpting or on the way back. Okay? I'm going to accept the defaults here. I'm going to take that slider all the way to the right and hit OK. The reason I do that is, first off, fidelity to the model, but second off, when you go into a sculpting package, particularly 3D coat, if you go in with really simple geometry, it can be difficult for that sculpting package to understand what you brought in. Going to do the same thing with the insert. Okay, and we're going to go into 3D coat. Okay, going to be using the sculpt room, and I'm going to be bringing my geometry into this folder. So right click on the folder, import object. And bring this in by double clicking on it. So here's the geometry in 3D coat. It's really important to know how to set this up. You want to have import without voxelization, import as child, and respect negative volumes all checked. I also hit auto scale, okay, so that 3D coat can decide how big it would like to have this in here. Okay, and then there is a estimated poly count. This tells you how many polys it thinks it needs to make this. That is far too low. But in 3D coat is really made for accessorizing figures for gaming. So it likes to keep what it visualizes your geometry with very low. Okay, so we've got auto scale on, we hit apply. When I hit apply, it's going to ask me, it's the first time I've tried to import an object into my scene. Do I want to keep the initial scale for object for export later? Absolutely yes. Always check yes. Otherwise, when you go back into rhino, it won't be the right size. 3D coat is not an engineering application like rhino. It does not feel beholden to tell you what size things are. So precision is being left behind at this point. So hit yes. Now, it shows you have a model here, but sometimes if it didn't come in properly, you really don't. To verify you actually have your model, pick a brush, and there it is. Okay, so we have that model in place. It has changed the name to chain clasp. I'm going to assign it a material. I'll assign it this copper color, so it's easier for me to visualize. And then I'm going to repeat the process for the insert. So import, object, insert. If I haven't moved this original object, if I haven't changed anything, it will automatically bring it in to match what I have here. So I can just hit apply. So the scale and everything will be set to match. If I've moved anything around, all bets are off. But as long as I leave it alone, hit apply. And you'll see it didn't give me a warning that time because it assumes I want that forever and ever now. And smooth. And you can see it brought it in. I'm going to assign it a color or a material. So it's now a child of the clasp. And maybe I'll change the color of that just to show you how it's done. Edit shader settings, and then I can just click on this color box and make it whatever I want. That's actually pretty close to the copper that I'm starting with. So, anyway. So there are my 2 items in from Rhino. Okay. This coppery finish is not very helpful to me. So I'm actually going to take that away. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to assign it the default material or the skin material. Actually, that's clay. Metcap clay. Frog skin. Okay, and you have more you can choose from. These are the default, and you have a whole number of things you can choose from. But the skin is fine. Just something that's not reflective and metallic, because for sculpting it's a little distracting. In fact, what would be good is to have them both the same base material and then just change the color if I want. That way they both reflect the same. Okay, so all that, I now have them in place. I want to put these in the middle of the world. And so I'm going to bring up the transform brush. Everything in 3D Code is a brush. I can find it along here, but if you hit spacebar on your keyboard, it'll bring them up in an easier to see format. These top 10 are brushes that I have assigned because they're my favorites. Okay, so I happen to have transform up here. If I didn't, I would grab it from here and place it there, and it would give it to me as a shortcut. So we hit the transform brush, and that brings up my transform tool for 3D Code. Okay, I would like this to be in the center of mass. Now I'm doing everything with the parent, and the child will move along with it. So I'm going to put centered mass, and then I'm going to click on this X. When I click on this X, it'll take it to 0, 0, 0. Okay, in 3D Code. So there we go. You will notice that this orientation is shifted from Rhino. It's turned sideways. Like many 3D applications, it disagrees with Rhino. Rhino thinks that up is Z. Most, or not most, certainly many 3D apps believe that Y is up. So 3D Code is one of those. I could rotate this geometry, but I'm not going to bother. Okay, so and I'm basically done with that brush, and I'm almost ready to start sculpting. 3D Code is a voxel program. Oh, by the way, how I'm navigating, those of you who've never looked at a 3D Code video, I'm navigating right drag is zoom in and out, and it works best if you drag them side to side. Left click drag is revolve, and middle click is your pan. Okay. If you're on top of the object with a brush active and you hit control, different things happen. So we'll talk about that in a minute. You have to basically hold down an Alt key when you do your navigation commands if your cursor is on top of the model. It's like effectively a clutch that disengages the brush so you don't make marks while you navigate. Do that, or you keep outside of the model when you navigate. Okay? These models are way too low resolution to be used. In 3D Coat, I don't like to sculpt on anything that comes out of Rhino with less than 200,000 faces on it to try and preserve my Rhino detail. So I'll start with the chain clasp. If I right-click on it, there's a resample option. It tells you right now it's set to 32,000. I'm going to put that up to 200,000. I'm going to set this to smooth. Hit OK. And that geometry has now been updated. It's important. A couple of things you're going to notice. First off, what you saw before was just a display. It wasn't your real model. Okay? 3D Coat is interpreting what it got from Rhino and giving you something to look at, but it wasn't the actual geometry. This is the actual geometry. You'll notice you have subtle faceting showing everywhere. That's because when you look at a shaded model, in Rhino, for example, it has smoothing groups applied, which means that Rhino agrees that any two faces that meet a certain tolerance will be viewed or displayed as a smooth surface. When we brought this in, 3D Coat borrowed those smoothing groups from Rhino to let us look at it. Once I resample it, there are no smoothing groups, so this is what the mesh looks like. Don't be concerned. When you print this out, that texture doesn't exist. I am more concerned about the sharpness than I am anything else. And I'm getting a certain amount of dithering here, but I think it's okay. I'm going to take it, I'm going to undo, and I'm going to resample it again. I'll just do it at 320,000. See if that makes much of a difference. A little. Okay, I'm going to call that sufficient for what I want to do. So now I need to redo because actually this insert is really loose. So you'd look at it, you'd be terrified and go, oh my Rhino geometry's crap. It's not. It's just, it has to be resampled. 3D Coat knows all the information, it's just choosing not to show it to you. So it can run faster, basically. So it's at 638. I do a minimum of 10 times anything I'm doing. This is a small piece, so I could probably go 6,300, but I don't like the idea. I'll try 60,000. It's a different strategy, folks, if you are modeling in 3D Coat to begin with, and you're not bringing in things from Rhino. But when you're bringing in things from Rhino, you really do want to keep a certain amount of the integrity of that object. So extra faces, extra density is not a problem. I'm going to see, actually I'll just leave that as it is. I'm going to take it a little higher though. Undo. And I'll resample it again. This time at 120,000. That'll be plenty. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to take a brief pause. So, we have the two pieces in position now. They've both been resampled. What I like to do, before I go any further, is I like to take the combined part here, and I like to do a clone, just a standard clone. This way I have a safety backup in case something goes wrong. Next, I'm going to convert these to voxel. 3D Coat is unique in that it, in my experience, in that it allows you to model either in surfaces mode or in voxels mode. Surface is a fine mesh. Voxel is actually like sugar cubes. It's like little tiny, it's 3D pixels is what it is. So the beauty of this, and why I like to use 3D Coat for jewelry and working back and forth with Rhino, is that anything that's a voxel object is automatically a solid object, which means it's printable. So when I bring things out of 3D Coat into Rhino, they're solid objects. Also, you can Boolean anything that's a voxel object. So things in Rhino that don't want to Boolean, and this would be a good example of something that would not have wanted to Boolean in Rhino, will Boolean here without any problem. So I'm going to convert these to voxel. To do so, I just click on the S and accept. Click on the S and accept. And once they're voxel, I'll pick the parent, and I will go to merge. This is 3D code speak for Boolean union. And I'm going to say merge subtree. Merges everything in that stack. And there we go. This is now one object. Okay. So now it's time for me to start sculpting on this. I want to do two things. I want to smooth out the joint where this comes together, and I want to make a single kind of bulbous soft cap. So off I go. I don't like looking at this in the perspective view. They have like a perspective or parallel. I prefer the parallel view. That's just me. Okay. So I have this. I'm going to go to a brush that I can use to do modeling. My favorite brushes, I'm going to start with a fill brush because that will run material into the piece. I'm going to turn this back into surface. For most purposes, surface is better than voxel for the actual modeling. I find there are certain brushes. It looks like they're the same brushes, but they behave very differently, so they really aren't. Voxels feel different, and the best thing I can tell you to get an understanding of what that is to use the program and experiment with them. So here's a fill brush. Now the brush size in here is determined by that icon that you can see there. The circle, the yellow outline, shows you how large the brush is. The red bump shows you how powerful it is. To change the size of that, hover the brush over the top of the part and right-click, drag side to side to increase the size. Right-click, drag up and down to change the power. That's why you can't really rotate unless you push down the Alt key. If your mouse is above this. Out here, you can zoom in and out, no problem. In here, if I hit my right mouse key, I'm going to be changing my brush dimensions. So if I want to do it here, I hold down the Alt key, and that allows me to go ahead and work. So, by the way, I'm using a pen tablet right now, a pen monitor, so I'm drawing right on my screen. 3D coat brushes are pressure sensitive. So the harder I press, the more it'll fill. I want this to be symmetrical. So I'm going to go to Symmetry, Enable Symmetry, and I believe I want Z. Nope. Why? I get confused because of the difference from Rhino. But there we go. That gives me my symmetry. So now anything I do on one side, I do on the other. Okay? I don't like looking at that plane, so I will hide it. But I can see I have symmetry because I can see the dot for the brush. And I'm just going to come in here and let the fill brush do as much for me as it can. And you can see that very quickly smooths things up all by itself. Now, my favorite brush for removing material is the Rapid 2. I like my Rapid 2 set very low. You can see the depth here is at 5%. The red line in the center of the icon looks flat. Okay? I use it to remove material, not to add material, but the native mode for this brush is add. For almost all of your 3D coat brushes, it's add. To change it, okay, I can hold down the control button and it turns dark blue, and that means it'll now remove material. That gets tiresome since I'm going to be using it strictly to remove material, so I'll click on the invert tool setting and that will make it always do that for me. I'm going to zoom in so I can see well what I'm working on. See, I can start to remove that. Now that's a lot of impact, and that's even at just a 5%. So I'm going to make the brush smaller. And I'm going to push lighter and lighter as I come out. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key. The Shift key brings me that big green, it's set very powerful right now, that green brush head, which is smoothing. It's most effective if you brush and smooth without changing your camera angle. These brushes are somewhat dependent on the angle that you're viewing the model. So if you make brush strokes and then you move the camera around, it's going to be harder to get them to go smooth. Not impossible. But harder. That's good enough for the bottom. Come back in here for the top. Be the same process. Just kind of allow that to V in. And then smooth. If I feel like I have gouged in too far, which I really don't, but if I did, I could come in with my fill brush and touch it with that. That's good. Okay. The last thing I want to do is to fill up this bulb. And to do that, I need a brush that adds material. My favorite brush for adding material is the Buildup Brush. Also with a low amount. This is set to a depth of 5. I'm going to want to go a little bit heftier than that. I'll set it to 12. And I'm going to basically dab, short dabbing strokes. Like any sculpting software, it's really a good idea to keep rotating your point of view. To make sure that you're getting what you think you're getting. Same thing, hold down the Shift key, I will get smoothing. So I'll smooth this out a little bit to see what I have. Okay, so that looks pretty good as a base place to start. I want to add a little more material in the center. Clay brush is also good for this sort of work. Rapid 2 is actually good at this in its native mode instead of it. But I just have a fondness for this brush, so I use it. Rapid 2, going to come back with that. See, and so while I could actually do this in Rhino, doing it this interactively, where I can revolve the model and make a decision aesthetically as to what I'm getting, much harder to do when you're drawing curves and doing sweeps and reworking it and reworking it. I'm using very, very light brush pressure. Okay, I'm going to go for the full-on smooth brush. For just general smoothing, it's hard to beat the actual brush that's made for it. See how powerful that was? It actually took off too much material. There's that hard spot right here. That's a remnant, that's something in the mesh. In 3D Coat, I can get rid of those a lot of times by just going to voxel. Take it to voxel, it scrambles things enough that, like fingerprints, like things that are stuck in there, get removed. And there's a smooth brush here as well, in voxel mode. That's a very beautiful tool. So often before I take work like this out, I will bring it into surface mode and into voxel mode and do some final smoothing using the voxel smoother. Okay, that looks nice. Now, there's a pretty hard line here where Rhino made these two surfaces, the hard flat. So I will use the smoothing brush in voxel mode. To go ahead and soften that transition so it feels more organic. Okay, I'm pretty much done here. Now I have a decision to make if I like how this is smoothing out here. I can try and soften it a little bit. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, that part is done. Fine. So, next thing I'm going to do, before I export, and if I can go back and forth to surface and voxel as many times as I want, but before I'm going to export this, I'm going to right-click on this, and there has a thing here called fill voids. If there are any pockets inside of your part, that'll fill them. So now you know it's absolutely solid. There's nothing loose floating around in there. And then I'll export this out of here. Export, selected objects. And like I said, I now will send it back to Rhino as an STL. This is the one more thing about 3D Coat is it is the very best optimizer, mesh optimizer I've ever seen. The software is worth the price of admission just for this. It will take a mesh and it will minimize it to a tremendous degree and keep all the detail there. So right now, if I do it 50%, it'll go down to 182,000 faces, which is not much. I can take it to 70 to 85%, and it'll still preserve every detail. It really will. So I'll set this at 70%. It's 100,000 faces, which is nothing. And I'll hit OK. And it's done. I then save this as a 3D coat file. In case I want to come back and rework it, or if a client wants to change. I am now through a 3D coat, going back into Rhino, and to give you an idea of what we've done, I will import the file. It's also good just to make sure that it remained actual size. It always does, but it gives you a warm feeling to look at it in the Rhino environment and see. Now see, it's been repositioned around 0, 0, but that's easy for me to move. There are the two objects on top of each other. And there's the finished part. And that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching.